Okay, I hope me too. So, in this room, we are entrepreneurs, investors, students, and activists. But above all, we are citizens of this world, sharing a common future and especially a common home, one planet that we know. Climate change, like you know, will greatly alter how we live, work, and communicate. Its implication will reshape every aspect of our life. But new actors will emerge, and new types of collaboration will see the day. The cost to adapt to climate change is around $70 to $100 billion, an expensive fiscal cost that governments around the world cannot meet alone. So that is why, more than ever, we need a multi-stakeholder approach and innovative collaboration to achieve the transition towards a clean future. The next session will discuss the new actors and behaviors of the clean economy. But before that, please watch this video.
We are all responsible. Every one of us can play a part in the clean tech acceleration. Citizens, NGOs, private sector, regulators, businesses, governments. New actors and activists must act for the development and promotion of clean technologies. Collaboration among all the partners will lead to new consumption behaviours geared towards building a cleaner, greener, more responsible and more prosperous economy.
Perfect. So please welcome for this next panel, Jean Rognetta, Editor-in-Chief at Forbes, and our panelists. Please make some noise for them.
Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and please welcome Pedro Arias, Alzbeta Klein, Myriam Maestroni, and Henry Nyakarundi. And I must start by thanking you all and Monte Carlo and the organizers, because the organizers in particular asked 3 questions that we're going to try to answer and that you'll find in your program. But the first question, I mean, is who are the actors of the new economy? And now answering that question will allow me not to introduce the people on my panel, since we actually have 2 actors of this new clean economy. So maybe the simplest way to begin is to introduce yourselves, and we'll start right away in the debate. Myriam Maestroni, how are you and why are you here?
Fine. I'm very happy to be here because actually I am in my redemption phase. I spent 20 years in oil and gas business before I set my company called the Economie d'Energie, meaning that we work on energy efficiency. And actually in other countries it's called On5 company because all the energy comes from 4 origins in the universe, and the 5th energy is the one we are not using. So the one, of course, not emitting CO2 and the cheapest one. And I decided to set up the company 7 years ago from scratch. And today, Economie d'Energie is 200 people, half women, half men, which is something I think important to say. And we have been doing 500,000 work of energy efficiency in France in the past 7 years, and also in Italy, Spain, and UK, where we're starting as well. And energy efficiency is part of the new issues in the new world, because basically in Europe we have 100 million houses, if I take just this example, consuming energy by 6 to 9 times more than the energy that would be used if we were building new houses compliant with current building regulation. So this is a big issue. And of course, we are all concerned. The problem is that nobody is waking up in the morning saying, what I'm going to do to save energy. So we thought that digitalization was a very good opportunity to bring all of us, any citizen, the option to start taking a step and to become a consume actor. which is a key issue.
And how is the redemption of your soul proceeding, Myriam?
Actually, I'm very happy. I think that, you know, the new energy world is based on conviction. I started back to 2004 with this idea. It has been very difficult for 10 years because back to 2004, I was managing a gas company. I was telling, we need to help our customer to save energy. People thought I was crazy. You know what? After a couple of years, regulation came and said to the energy companies, you need to help your customer to save energy. And it was for them like something completely, you know, very counterintuitive. So for me, I was very happy. And I think that when I see what it is with people from 12 nationalities and 32 years old, and really interested in what is going to happen in this world, I'm very happy that I did that.
Henry Nekarundi, you created Africa's, I believe, first renewable energy distributor. Is it really the first?
Yeah, well, the technology. So anyway, we developed a solar kiosk technology to revolutionize how distribution of services is done for low-income people. So let me give you guys a little bit of context. Most services in Africa have been digitized. You have airtime, mobile money, even government services now. But access to those services for low-income people is very problematic. So we look at that ecosystem and we saw the opportunity of developing what we call a one-stop shop platform, which is our solar kiosk, to bring smart distribution of services. So customers can get any digital services, including phone charging, including offline, online connectivity via Wi-Fi, all that from the platform. So we operate mostly in rural area, semi-urban area, and also in refugee camps. And we now in Rwanda and in Uganda. So it's a tech for social good type of business, you know, because a lot of time when you look at technology, there's a lack of inclusiveness in tech for the low-income people. But that's pretty much what we do as a business.
So these are two of the actors of this emerging economy, but let's try to go one step up and have a helicopter look or even a satellite look. Alzbeta, you work for the International Finance Corporation, which is actually, could I say, a sister company to the World Bank? Yeah? Can you be a sister company to the World Bank? You'll tell us about that. Anyway, you head the green side of the IFC.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jean. So Alzbeta Klein, Director and Global Head for Climate Business at the IFC, which is indeed a sister organization of the World Bank Group. So it takes a number of actors to make a difference in the new economy. And I'm privileged to sit next to Myriam and Henry, who are playing their part in the transition, but it takes a few others to make it work. So who are these other players? First of all, it's the large companies. And Myriam, I know you are trying to redeem your soul, but actually your companies that you worked with in the past that are making a huge difference today. So I'm just going to mention a couple of names. Shell with its new Sky scenario, which okay, not perfect, but a great first step in starting to think about how to get to net zero economy in 20, 30, 40 years. We are seeing the same thing in emerging markets. Mahindra stood up at the World Economic Forum. It's a large company out of India, and said that their green transition is actually bringing financial returns. So the whole ecosystem of large companies is making a difference. Then you've got smaller companies, and Henry, you're probably part of that ecosystem and that part of the ecosystem. We are seeing it in a number of areas. We are seeing it in off-grid solar. We are seeing it in distributed generation. We are seeing in even electric vehicle startups that are making a difference. There are two more actors that are playing a role in this transition. The third one is regulators. Regulators are waking up to the possibilities that without a transition, they are running a number of risks. And we in IFC run something called Sustainable Banking Network, where we have 35 regulators from emerging markets who are trying to green their own financial systems. And we don't tell them what to do, they actually learn from each other. So we've got a regulator from Bangladesh learning what a regulator in Sri Lanka has done, et cetera, et cetera. And then there is the last group, and that's investors. And investors are increasingly asking from their companies who are investing their assets about green transition. So that demand is coming up, and it's coming up from younger people who naturally care, and it's coming up from the generation that didn't care in the past, but are looking at aligning their values with their investment portfolios. And these are the four players, so large companies, small companies, regulators, and investors that, in my view, are making a difference in the transition.
Well, the investors are just here. Pedro, I believe it's your turn.
Good morning. Yes, I'm working with Amundi. Amundi is a global asset management company.
I believe it's the 8th or 10th biggest global asset manager.
Well, it's one of the top. It's the first non-American management company, just to say the other way around. Alzbeta is completely right. I mean, as an investor point of view, what matters today and tomorrow is really the appetite for the risk. So my business is not to have an opinion or a view upon the climate or whatever. It's really to find investments, assets, basically, that are coping the risk that I'm pricing in. So that's really the work that we're doing on behalf of investors. This is a growing concern in the community of investors, just because it's becoming a fiduciary duty to assess the risk of an asset, taking into account a number of issues, and the climate is becoming one of the most obvious. And there's no need to overstate what has been said this morning or the day.
But yeah, let's do, because overstating makes it clear, right, really, most of the time. Well, if I overstate it, so then you can correct it. What I understand has been happening has been that green indices have been overperforming normal indices, and therefore it's the whole of your industry that is turning greener for nothing nobler than just the profit motive. Yep. Is this accurate? So are you, in a way, the green man in Amundi, are you overtaking the whole company?
I'm not the green one. There are a number of friends that are more green than I am, but I'm not conceptual at all. So what I'm looking for is return. That's the only way for me to convince a client, an investor, that could be a pension fund. So these funds that are actually betting for us to have a pension in the next 20, 30 years. So these guys, what they need to do is to invest on a profitable way. Okay? So my job is really to find returns. What we've seen, and it's very much obvious today, is that, and we've started with indices, okay, is really by decarbonizing the indices, which is in a way over investing in companies with a minor greenhouse gas footprint, carbon footprint. Obviously, you
can I make it clear? If you underestimate in Volkswagen because they're building diesel engines, then you get a better financial return if you take just the big car makers at face value.
Yeah, I don't want to focus on Volkswagen, but it's fair to say...
I took anything that could happen. You said carbon imprint.
Yeah, it's fair to say that, let's say, in 20 years, there will be less diesel than today. So if you need to bet on a car maker, you probably bet on Tesla rather than any other, okay? And just look at the market capitalization, market cap. It's obvious that as an investor, I mean, no need to emphasize on the climate transition or whatever. If you want to have a good return, you need to bet on Tesla rather than the others. So that's our job. And that's really becoming, and once again, that's because that's critical, it's becoming a fiduciary duty, making the risk assessment needs to embed now the climate change, as one of the main concerns that we need to price in.
And Tesla is actually a good example of this mix of entrepreneurship and institutional drive. But is it so, before we all take our hands and sing Kumbaya, is it so easy for entrepreneurs? Myriam and then Henry?
Well, easy...
Myriam first, because I have a question afterwards on Africa.
Well, I think that is an interesting point to say that big companies try to change and try to do that in partnership with a smaller company that they didn't do before. Actually, in the new ecosystem, I have to say that the result we got were because large companies started trusting our new approach, and we worked together. And what is amazing is that at the beginning we were just playing with what Alzbeta mentioned, which were energy players, because by law they were obliged to do that. But it was a domino effect. So banks came in the game, hypermarket came in the game, do-it-yourself company came in the game, when they were not obliged. So the interesting question is, even post office in France is step in the game. Why? Because they are looking for organic growth, and they realize that they can find organic growth in this new business, which is, by the way, a kind of economy of optimization, renovation. So I think that is interesting. And of course, as an entrepreneur, it's not easy. I self-finance my company till now, but at the same time, I wouldn't be able to do that without this large corporation that trusted in our company. And of course, thanks to the regulatory framework, which is very important as well, because government should play their part in getting a proper regulatory framework where people are obliged to change. And then the domino effect starts, and it's interesting. So not easy.
Henry, sorry for cutting.
No, that's okay. I mean, in Africa, it's a little bit different, right? One of the challenges, the ecosystem in investment is fragmented, number one. Number two, we live in a global economy, right? So you see a lot of innovation in clean tech or any other innovation that come from abroad to be developed in Africa. And if you look at how funding is dispersed, those foreign companies get access to more funding than local innovator, which is a big problem because it's a total lack of inclusiveness. So what you see is you have a lot of African innovator that develop solution for Africa and have no access to funding. But yet there's a lot of capital, or I call it international capital. And it's not just the capital problem, but it's also government policy that needs to be changed. So, and I always say, if you empower a local innovator, you're not just helping that company, but it creates jobs. It creates, there's a byproduct where you have more engineers because they have to continue developing. 100% of our funding as ARED came from abroad to solve a problem on the continent of Africa. That to me is a big problem that needs to be addressed. You know, we're the youngest continent, and it's a continent that's going to double in the next 30, 40 years.
And has already started, actually, on the growth path.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What happened these last years was amazing. Am I
No,
cutting you out? Or because I think that the question you just put is a question for Alzbeta Klein. No? How to finance this entrepreneurial and environmental drive in Africa.
That's absolutely critical because there are a number of myths that we have in climate and climate business. And one of the myths that I keep hearing is that emerging markets have to develop exactly the same way as we have developed in the past in the developed markets. And I'd like to submit to all of you a hypothesis that emerging markets will develop very differently because of the technology that Henry was talking about. But it does need an intervention on a part of the government to do two things. First of all, you need to have good policies, and those policies have to enable the transition rather than hinder it. And we can go into details about what that means. And second thing you need to have is a level playing field. Jean, I have seen a study just last week from the UK, which talked about carbon pricing and carbon taxes. And depending on which industry you are in the UK, carbon price can go from minus £50 to plus £700. So some industries are taxed up to £700 per ton
And that's
carbon,
the UK.
and some and this is the UK, and this is where I'm talking about the need for level playing field. So entrepreneurs and established companies and all the others need to have certainty of the regulatory environment, and they need to have a level playing field so that these technologies can develop.
And this is something you told me. We were talking about intellectual property rights, but I think this need for, how do you say, more uniform regulatory environment and more stable in Africa is something you were already talking to me when we prepared this roundtable, Henry.
Yeah, I mean, IP is a big issue in Africa. You know, if you look at the statistic, most innovators in Africa don't register their IP. And we think because there is no technology being developed in Africa, but that's not true. It's just expensive. So your IP has to be registered in every country, talking about 50 plus countries. It's very expensive. You know, we're a startup. We're already starving for cash. We're not going to allocate money on IP. If you do an IP in Europe or in the States, it's one process, right? In Africa, we tried. We did an IP in Rwanda, and it took 3 years to get the IP registered. 3 years. By the time we got the IP, the technology had changed. And now you have to multiply this by whatever country we're going to, so we stop. So there should be one IP registration, for example, that is cost effective, you know. Same thing, you know, it's business registration is also problematic in different countries you go to. So if you build a technology that plan to expand, now you have to register your company in all those countries, hire a lawyer and all. So it's such a fragmented market. It's very difficult to expand.
It does sound a bit like Europe as well, though. I hear things like that told about the European Union. Anyway, there always are regulatory problems, and then there is finance. You had a green bond operation between the two of you, Pedro and Alzbeta. Perhaps you will care to talk about it, particularly if it has an African dimension or it leads some of the investment goes to Africa. Pedro, you want perhaps to talk about this?
Yeah, maybe if you...
Yeah, you start and I'll then pitch.
Absolutely. I mean, this is, once again, to underline the fact that it's much more easier for us to start with the large companies to invest in before investing in smaller companies, just because the investors, first of all, they would like to have their money deployed in companies they know. So there's nothing to do against that, just to wait until the investors are well educated and ready to take an additional risk, which could be the African one or a sector-specific one. To tackle this issue, what we've done after the indices is to team up with the IFC in order to share basically the risk. Okay, so we've set up a fund, a green bond fund for emerging countries, whereby the banks on the ground will lend money to dedicated projects that could be small or medium-sized projects, obviously green, okay, or towards the climate transition, and they will be refinanced by the fund we are co-managing. The IFC is taking, I would say, the riskiest part of the investment, if there's anything going wrong, and the other investors that we've pulled into the fund will take, I would say, the less riskier part of the investment, which in a way creates a good momentum, because if you avoid the risk of the currency, for instance, or the regulation or the political issues, then obviously it's becoming an investment that you can compare in relative terms with any other investment across the globe. And that's really pretty much what the investors would like to do. Okay, so after the phase of the indices, digging into the assets will require a risk-sharing mechanism that still need to be worked on. But this is a pretty good example with the AFC.
Yeah, because in a way you go from passive investment that just track indices, and we're talking about decarbonating indices, to active investment, which is actually taking risk. And there you do some de-risking magic, Alzbeta?
Yeah, de-risking magic, but I think it actually goes further, Jean, because it actually creates the market. So I'm very proud that my organization, IFC, was a third issuer of green bonds in the world. EIB was ahead of us, and so was the World Bank. We were the third issuer, so if green bonds can have 3 parents, we are one of them. And so then we issued a bunch of bonds on our own balance sheet. So we learned how to do it. Again, sort of going back to my first statement, which is big companies can make a difference, and then small companies will play as well, right? So for ourselves, we are not a big company, but we are probably one of the players in the international financial architecture. So we learned how to do it on our own balance sheet. And then we started seeing our clients, banks in emerging markets, who wanted to do the same thing. Why did they want to do the same thing? Because they had customers in renewables, they had clients in energy efficiency. So once they learned how to finance green, they said, okay, let us issue a bond, let us issue a green bond and play in that part of the market. And then the third step came, which was our idea to set up a bond fund, which would start purchasing those green bonds from financial institutions in emerging markets and bring them to investors. So you are creating supply in a market, you are creating demand in a market, and then you marry the two, and that's the fund that we have at Amundi. But then we saw that investors were not too keen on some of the risks, so they probably would go to, say, Mexico, but they were not too keen to go to, say, I'm going to pick a country, Zambia.
Or Rwanda.
Or Rwanda, for that matter. So we set up a junior tranche, a tranche of funding that is underpinning the investors, and that's coming from IFC. That's about $250 million. And based on that, we managed to bring in additional 1.2 billion of commercial capital, which Amundi is now managing.
So we're talking about 1.5 billion globally?
1.5. But we are looking to reach about 2 billion because, of course, the funds will recycle.
I think Myriam wants a share of it.
Yeah, because I think it's interesting to realize that eventually it's easier to finance large company because, of course, they have a long experience. But one of the point is, which puzzled me, is that, of course, they have a large experience in infrastructure and in building infrastructure. And for many years, they have been building their activity top-down with all the attention on supply chain because it was about diversity and security of supply. But in the new world, what I observe is that, in my view, we should speed up so much that we will not be able to do that without all the citizens. And I believe that this is a very important issue, that customer centricity. And many times in large organizations, they just lost the habit to really pay full attention to the customers. So we have a conflicting issue, which is actually something weird because digitalization is very much based on customer centricity, and is where by teaming up with large company and small company, we can do things that large company cannot do by themselves. So I think that one of the key issue in that is really to look for customer, to look for money, of course, but also to look for customer and to be able to convince customer to use those things that make sense for them. And sometimes just financing infrastructure, these infrastructure are not making sense for them.
Henry, please.
Sorry, I do want to add something that was not spoke about, because one of the gap that is missing is research and development money. So before we talk about expansion and growth and all those things, we have to have a technology. We have to test the technology. It took us about 5 years to develop our latest technology. That is a huge gap we need to fix. Now, I don't know who will fix that. I'm not a macro economist guy, but that's also aspect, because we're pushing innovation, we're pushing young men and women to develop solution to the problem we're facing today, but we're not giving them the capital to do so. That's the big problem, number one. Number two is the seed capital. So you have grants for research and development, and you have seed capital. Those are the two areas before we even go to growth. If we don't fix those two, there's not going to be that much growth in a lot of companies. Yes, there'll be some big and traditional companies, but they'll still be the same guys that dominate the market. We need to fix that too. That's the most important, at least to me.
Well, that's going to be a tough one for the finance world. So anybody cares to see how you go down from large caps down to seeds? Please, Alzbeta.
So I'd like to support what Henry said, because I think innovation is going to come through small companies. And we have seen time and again in Africa and elsewhere that it's smaller companies that are bringing innovation to the market. I'd like to mention one of them called Mobisol, which is a company doing off-grid solar in Uganda and actually in Rwanda, in your country, and a couple of others. They have about 70,000 households off-grid with sizable solar installations. They are not part of any big company. They are a small company. They are a startup. They got funding actually from us and many others. And there are a number of others who are doing the same thing. We are seeing a battery storage company out of Madagascar, which is powering telephone towers. This is not a large company. This is a startup, and the innovation that we are observing in many areas of energy storage, off-grid, distributed generation are not coming from large companies. They're coming from small companies. Now, how do they get funding? That's actually a critical question, because maybe we should set up a fund for some of the smaller companies to grow alternative energy in Africa. But these companies are grown from the ground up, and they are making it work in Africa, and they are essential to developing energy access in Africa.
Pedro, your strategy has been to create specific funds. One, the bond fund we talked about with Alzbeta, but also infrastructure funds, and I believe a venture fund.
Yes, absolutely.
Perhaps it's probably not a direct answer, but perhaps you can try to.
Well, I think regarding this question, we will probably face the issue that has been discussed this morning about the cost of the equity, the cost of the capital that you put at work in this project. Whatever we think personally, but the issue that I'm in charge of at Amundi is really to manage pension funds, basically. So out of the 1.4 trillion euro to be invested, already invested, behind that you have actually you and I, and we want to have returns on these funds because this is going to pay our pensions. So in a way, I mean, we need to create an ecosystem, and I'm pretty pushing for that, but keeping in mind that the channeling the money, our money, to this project, whatever we think, and we will probably all think that these are good projects, we need to have returns. Otherwise, we're going to create a bigger problem than the one we're trying to solve. And having that, I mean, this is our what we need to, our roadmap. Obviously, the straightforward way to start to invest is through passive investment, so the indices, and it's fair to say that indices are for large companies. Okay, and the second phase that is probably starting recently and will increase over the years is as long as we educate our people, our clients, towards it makes sense to be invested in Rwanda or Uganda, because in terms of risk and return, this is the kind of product you will have. Unless we do that and we find that point, it's going to be very much difficult to channel the money, and once again, the money is our money, okay, to these assets. And we're working on it, okay, and the financial institutions are working on it, sometimes blending public money with private money, and it makes a lot of sense, but it's a progress. And I'm pretty confident, as of today, Amundi and the other asset managers, we are increasing our exposures to climate change and emerging countries. This will continue, but it takes time, and I need to assume that it takes time, and it's not that a bad idea because we need to educate our people. Okay.
Perhaps what you said boils down to the fact that to go into innovation in Europe can be possible, or Europe or America, can be possible through a specific fund, but emerging markets, and Africa in particular, are a more complicated reality where a public intervention is necessary, or am I?
You're gonna find me boring, but once again, it ties into the risk assessment. We have the same issue in Asia. I mean, when you have 20 or 15 regulatory different environments, it's very much difficult to know if it's better to invest in a project in Uganda or Rwanda or Congo. I mean, it takes time, it takes money to invest because you need to invest in people on the ground and to dig into the regulation, the legal framework and that kind of stuff. And it's obvious to say that it's still more easy in Europe, where we have at least one framework of agreement. So it's much more easy, and to explain to our clients and users that this is the kind of technologies we're investing in. I mean, the echo is much more easy if you invest locally than abroad in Africa. I mean, we're not even in Africa yet in equities, listed equities. So before being there for non-listed projects in the green industry, it will take a little bit more of time, except if we team up with a multilateral bank or a friend of IFC, whereby, once again, they will avoid the final investor to take the full risk of it.
That's what so it could be a role for IFC, or what's a friend of IFC?
We have been in this business for over 60 years. We are the largest investor in emerging markets, and we actually love Africa, and we love risk, and we love investing in emerging markets. That's what we do day in, day out. But there is a couple of things that we can do to push green transition in those markets. So what Pedro was saying is that European pension funds are too scared to go to Africa today. But what about African pension funds? What about savings that are in the markets? And this is where you're working with the local financial institutions in those markets to be able to help them invest in a green transition in their own markets. We've seen it in Latin America already for the past 30 years because they reformed the pension system and they have a pension pool that is investing in Chile, for example, and in many other places. And we're starting to see some of it in Africa as well, from South Africa up through the continent. So the money is there, but we need to find mechanisms, both through blended finance, through grants, through basically a number of tools to be able to de-risk those projects and invest in them.
I had a feeling that the room or yourself, Henry, felt that the money is there.
Yes, the money is there. I mean, you know, we've got most of our money through grants, competition. There is money out there. Let's not fool ourselves and think there's no money. The problem is, how do you channel that money? That's the issue. You know, when you have company that getting the majority of the capital, and then the rest of us, you know, are not able to access. And there's a lot of issue. We're not going to debate about that, but it will take forever. But the question is, how can we democratize access to capital, where an African company can access to the same fund as a foreign company? Because let's not forget, and the example that was given, Mobisol, great company, I know them personally, but it's still a foreign technology, and I can only speak for Africa. You know, we're not going to build the African ecosystem of the clean tech with foreign technology. That's not going to happen. You know, we need to build our own technology, and we need to get funding for that. That's the key.
This is a bit like the multi-stakeholder approach that you were having, Myriam.
Well, actually, I would add to that I don't know so much Africa, but I can tell you that when you are talking about energy transition, it's not easy for women either, because I used to be the only one at the top 100 of my company before, and right now I really choose to have half women, half men. And I do believe that women can play a part on that, because this is a very much more holistic approach of the business, instead of having a step-by-step way to approach it as we used to do in the past world. Once I've said that, in my situation, it's true that I had to make my proof. Today, to be honest, people willing to fund the company, and I hope that I will do that to accelerate the growth. But it has been a long run before getting to this point. And it was really about proving for 10 years that the idea could be okay, and to get the trust of people willing to work with us. So this is an issue. The second one, I think that we shouldn't underestimate, even in Europe, because Europe is kind of a very fragmented market in the energy business, even if we have a European directive trying to get the sense of what we should do. And today, regulatory framework are still very different in the different countries, in the way they applied in the different markets. Spain is not the same than Italy or UK. Most of the time in energy efficiency, B2B is privileged on household market, for example. And on the top of that, the period of time regulators are working are not enough to invest properly. So we have 1 to 3 years a period of time when we might get some more visibility for all of us. So I think that all help. All help.
This agreed. There is still too optimistic, still too, let's hold our hands and think. No. Since we're at the end of it, I would like to put a pessimistic question, okay? Your ecosystem, ladies and gentlemen, has been built for, well, the Club of Rome was 1971, if I remember, so for, say, 50 years, more give or take, on a rising tide of public opinion and government approval that has been helping entrepreneurs and the people that finance them and the whole energy transition. Nobody, unless I missed it, nobody has uttered so far in this morning the T word. You know, the name of the president that took the United States out of the Paris Accord. So I'll try not to pronounce the T word either, but is your ecosystem strong enough to survive a political storm, or the fact that the general political consensus that we need the transition is apparently breaking down? Are your companies and your whole ecosystem strong enough? I'll let you all take the question in turn, the way you like. Myriam.
Well,
but just very shortly, 30 seconds.
Unfortunately, everything is speeding up, including the climate change, which is now an urgency, a complete urgency. So we have 20 years to sort out things and not 100 years, as you thought 5 years ago. So that helps. Now, if you ask for my business, without a proper regulatory system, my business still a good business, but the development will be 50% of what it has been. So it's true that there is a very important articulation between the role of the state, speeding up, and the business, even if the business, without any, and United States is proving that, without any legal framework, realize that today it's profitable to invest in green economy. And actually, for the first time, Harvard Business Review last January said it is profitable to invest in green economy. Thanks God.
I'll pick
Alzbeta.
up on that,
Yes,
John.
please.
I'll pick up on that. Look, every year, the world invests $300 billion plus in renewables. 300 billion. If you count all the multilateral institutions, EIB, EBRD, IFC, you name it, you're going to get 5 billion, which tells you that 295 billion is commercial money. Somebody is putting that money into the green economy, and believe me, they're not doing it because of the charity. They're doing it because there are returns. We have seen time and again that green means profitable, and that's what makes me a believer in this transition. It makes sense to invest in the green economy transition.
Pedro Arias.
No, I can only agree. I mean, basically, that's the point. My job is really and our job is really to find profitability at first stance, and afterwards, becoming, convinced that the green economy is part of those sectors where we need to invest. But I would put it this way rather than the other way around. I mean, we're not starting from the concept. Whoever can think whatever he wants, but really on the profitability, which will drive and channel the private investment towards these assets. That's the key, basically, to me.
Henry, you'll have le mot de la fin.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I mean, the ecosystem, it's a risk, but it's a risk everywhere. You know, part of being an entrepreneur is enjoying the risk that you take to solve a big problem. So I don't focus on the risk, I focus on the solution. And I believe that this is the best time to be an entrepreneur because the problems are massive, the issues are big, and we need solutions. So I don't, that's what I look for. I look at risk as an opportunity.
So it wasn't really kumbaya, it was we shall overcome. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you all for this very interesting discussion. You can make some noise and applause them. Thank you.